Welcome, my name is Lexi Jong, and here I like to talk about luxury makeup. And today we're going to be talking about the new SUQQU Glow Powder Foundation. Now, before we get started, let me just explain to you how this is packaged. Now, I purchased mine from Selfridges, and if you go and take a look at the website, you'll see that it has the Glow Powder Foundation refill available. There are 9 shades in this particular powder foundation. I picked up shade 210, which is the lightest shade with cool undertones. And there's also a shade 110, which is what I have actually in the liquid cream product, which I thought was just a tad too dark. So I decided to go with the cooler tone version because I was told that one was a little bit lighter. So we'll talk about shades in a few minutes, but as I was saying, you can get the refill on Selfridges. They do also sell a case, and the case is, I'll put a picture up, but it has the powder puff, you know, the sponge that goes on one side and the refill goes on the other side. So you're buying them separately, not together, at least at this point. I don't know whether they will be packaged together in the future, but right now, if you are purchasing, make sure that you are getting what it is that you are expecting to receive. So unfortunately, the case is not currently available. So I picked up the foundation powder refill. The case was actually available before the foundation was available. I saw the case, I almost grabbed it. I was like, oh, it'll still be available when the powder colors come out. But unfortunately it wasn't. So I should have grabbed it and I didn't. And I haven't seen a return since I picked this up yet. But if you buy the case, it comes with a sponge. Otherwise, you are able to buy like a 2-pack of just the sponges separately as well. So just make sure you know exactly what it is you're purchasing. Now, in this collection, they've also released a primer. I did not pick the primer up. The primer is tinted. I'll post a picture of it here. And I wasn't sure if it was going to be too dark for me. And since I haven't had the best luck color matching with SUQQU, I didn't want to invest a whole lot of money in something if I wasn't sure that the powder foundation shade would work well for me. So I passed on the primer. But what I found out afterwards, and if you look at the SUQQU website, they have more information on this. The Selfridges website kind of makes it sound like it's just a primer, you know, it's going to give you some blurring action and so forth. It provides a nice base. But if you actually look into it a little bit more deeply, the primer was actually developed to help provide coverage. So this powder foundation, if you would like to get more coverage out of it, it is definitely recommended to pair this with the primer. And it's the primer that you can build up to a coverage level that you like. So that's going to kind of help if you have things you want to hide. For example, the redness in my cheeks, I would kind of build up thin layers of the primer and then put the powder foundation on for this more satiny glow type of finish. Now, the finish on this powder foundation is meant to be reminiscent of a ceramic glaze. It's supposed to be a satin finish. And I have to say, I think the finish on the powder is stunning. I absolutely love the way the finish looks on my skin. I mean, yeah, it's beautiful. Whether it's liquid or powder, you can't even tell. A lot of times with a powder foundation, they can look a little dry or powdery. This one does not, and I have to say it stays the same all day. So before we get started on the details, I'm gonna first share with you an application clip, and I'm gonna show you what it looks like when you apply it without primer with a brush versus a sponge. We'll also use a dampened sponge. And then I have another clip with a wear test, and that one does have a primer. So for the primer, I decided to use the Dior primer, the Dior Forever Skin Veil primer that came out, because that one, again, is slightly tinted, it's blurring, and it seemed the most similar out of what I have to the SUQQU primers. I do think the SUQQU primer, however, would be a better choice if this is something that you're interested in. So I'm going to share those clips with you, and then we'll come back and talk a little bit more about this product. All right, so we're going to take a look at the foundation using a brush with no primer, as well as using a sponge with no primer. So we're going to start off with the Buff and Blur brush. Now, keep in mind, this is a dense brush and it is meant for foundations and powder foundations and things like that. If you use something lighter and fluffier, you're really not going to get any coverage. So here is the difference with one layer. Let's add a little bit more. So you can see that it does give some coverage without any primer, but it's really not a ton. Like you're not, I would still consider it more like a light coverage. So here it is with the brush. Now I didn't purchase the separate sponge for the SUQQU because it's basically you buy the refill and then you can buy the case. The case has a sponge with it. The case has been out of stock since I picked this up. So I don't have that. You can buy the sponges separately as well, but I was just waiting for the sponge. So I'm just gonna take a different sponge here from, this is actually from, I think, who makes this other one? Oh, from the Shiseido Powder Foundation. That's one that I like a lot. You can use that one wet or dry. So I just wanna show you how the coverage changes with the sponge versus the brush. Let's add a little bit more here. All right, so here it is with the sponge versus the brush. And I have to say that, you know, you get more coverage with the sponge, but you can see that it's just, you know, not perfectly smooth. You know, like a liquid really gives better coverage if you're trying to cover redness like I am, because it'll like kind of sink in a little bit more, whereas this is more surface, if that makes sense. But overall, if you're looking for more coverage with this particular powder foundation, I would definitely recommend some sort of tinted primer as well as using sponge versus the brush. You can definitely see that there is better coverage with the sponge side versus the brush side. Both of these applications, again, are without primer, and you can kind of bump up the coverage a little bit by using primer underneath. All right, so now we are going to try one more thing. And again, I still have the powder foundation on, but we're gonna go on top of that. So I dampened the sponge, and now we're gonna go into this and see how it performs wet. So let's check this out on the brush side first. Okay, I'm just gonna try patting a little bit and see how that does. Okay, so here is the coverage with a dampened sponge. Wow, I'm getting like a shadow here, and you know, it's funny. That's like actually me. I don't have any extra powder there. The way this this particular shade is working, it kind of like enhances my bone structure there a bit. All right, so sponge and dry sponge. So just gonna finish this off. All right, so here's the foundation with a dampened sponge. You can see that it definitely gives you more coverage. That glow is really evident right at the beginning. So here it is, and you know, my skin feels dry to the touch. It's not moist or dewy feeling other than, you know, normal. Feels like my normal skin, okay? So it's not more moist or more dry than it would be otherwise. You can see using a damp, the color difference is definitely more evident. So if you have this foundation in a shade that's just a touch too light, you might want to try using a dampened sponge. It seems to deepen the shade just a touch, or maybe it's just the way that it builds up, but it's definitely a little bit deeper on me using it dampened than it is using it dry. I'm gonna move. All right, so we are going to start off with the Dior Forever Skin Veil Primer. And this is a tinted primer, but it doesn't really leave color on my skin per se. So let me show you how that looks. So you can see that, you know, it's tinted, but it's still not really providing a lot of coverage. And the SUQQU primer, you know, when you look at the Selfridges site, it doesn't really seem like anything other than a primer. But when you read the SUQQU site, it sounds like that's where you get the coverage from the glow powder. Like it allows more coverage to be built, and the primer itself is tinted. So as you layer more and more coverage on that, the powder will then act accordingly and provide a little bit more coverage. It adheres a little bit differently, it seems like. So I'm not really sure. I don't have that primer, at least at the moment. I'm still deciding whether I'll get it. But this is the closest primer I have to something like that. So I thought we would try this one out today, and I have already tested it like this. So this is the SUQQU Glow Powder Foundation, and this is shade 210, and I'm taking the Chantecaille Buff and Blur brush. Okay, so here's the side with the powder versus without. So you can see you do get some coverage here, but it's definitely not as much as like a liquid foundation or even some other powder foundations I've used in the past. But it's much more coverage on top of this particular primer than it is just on bare skin or on top of like a more translucent primer. Okay, so coverage, no coverage. So you can see it does build up. Okay, just add a little bit more. All right, so here it is. So overall, this color is probably the best color that I can get from the SUQQU powders, would be my guess. But you can see that it is just a touch deeper, and in this like brighter lighting, it's not quite as noticeable. But when I go out to, like, I look in my bathroom lighting or something, it's a little bit more noticeable that the color just isn't quite right for me. So that's part of the reason I haven't decided if I want to invest in the SUQQU primer, because I love the way this powder actually looks on the skin, but you know, the color is just not 100%. So we shall see. But we're going to do a wear test with this today, and we'll see how this holds up. So I am going to add the rest of my makeup, and I'll see you in a minute and show you what that looks like so you can kind of see where the wear test starts. All right, so this is an up close of how my makeup's gonna look for the wear test today. So I have just a touch of the Chanel Les Beige Healthy Glow Sheer Powder in N50 right here, and then the Sisley Coral Blush on my cheeks, along with the Guerlain Meteorites Pearl Dust Palette, the peachy shade in there. Eyes are Hourglass Scattered Lights in Vivid, and lips Chanel Rouge Cocoa Bloom in 110 Chance. And I didn't add any finishing powder. I made sure not to touch this particular area with any brushes or powder so we can kind of compare. But I did want to note that even using the brushes to apply the blush and the like bronzer shade, it didn't seem to move any of the SUQQU face powder. So just something to note, coverage didn't seem to change with either of those products, and I didn't notice any like shifting or moving of the actual powder foundation. So that's everything. And this is just a distance shot so we can see how the powder looks from afar. And I think in the distance shot, you can see that the the color match is a little bit more off. All right, so it has been 6.5 hours now. This is what the powder foundation looks like from a distance. And let's come in closer. All right, so here is an up-close shot of the SUQQU Glow Powder Foundation. Again, I have absolutely no additional product on this section here. I have the Sisley Coral Blush and highlight here. And right over here is the Chanel Les Beige Healthy Glow Sheer Powder in N50 for a bronzer. So you can see coverage is holding up well. There is definitely a glow that I'm getting from this powder foundation. You could see that definitely from the distance shot. You can see it up close. It's kind of like a radiance, but it doesn't feel moist. Like it doesn't feel greasy or oily or anything like that. So the glow is coming from the actual product, but there is no additional like moisture or anything on my skin. Everything's holding up really well. So I'll see you in a few hours. It has been 10 minutes shy of 11 hours since I applied everything. This is what it looks like from a distance. And I think it's holding up really well. As I mentioned in the last update, I have this like glow on my skin from this foundation, but even now there is still no like greasiness. It doesn't feel like moist at all. You know, I don't feel like there's any extra oil production. My skin feels normal. So it doesn't really feel like I have anything on, but I do have this extra radiance, which I think it's really nice. So I'm gonna bring you in closer. All right, so you can see that there really hasn't been any wear or anything on this foundation. I am very impressed with how it has held up. Again, you know, I don't have like the highest coverage on my cheeks with this foundation, but I think overall it has worn very well. You can see I do have some signs of wear over here, but overall, I think it's not, you know, it has stayed a lot better than I expected. So this is what it looks like. And again, we're just 10 minutes short of 11 hours at this point. Okay, it's been about 13.5 hours since I applied everything. This is what it looks like from a distance. And here it is up close. To me, it looks the same as the 11-hour check-in. So nothing really all that different. I have blown my nose a little bit today, so you can see, you know, not much coverage remaining there. Cheeks are good. Everything still feels, you know, like normal skin. There's no like oiliness or anything. And yeah, this is how it's held up. I hope those clips were helpful so you can see how this powder performs. And just a little product information. This is 0.35 ounces or 10 grams. It's made in Japan. It has a 12-month shelf life. If you purchase just the refill like I did, then it does come in this little plastic case. Obviously, this lifts out so you can attach it to something else, but I've been kind of keeping it in here and just closing it off in this. One other thing I'd like to note about this, if you decide to take this out, it doesn't seem to be a magnetic pan, and I actually just tried this on a magnet and I didn't realize there's actually a bunch of glue holding this in. It is a wet glue, like still, it's very, very sticky, and I just kind of got it all over. So just something to note, if you're gonna take this out of here, make sure that you have a permanent place that you're going to be putting it. Now, as for the actual product itself, I really like the actual product a lot. I'm not thrilled with the color match that I have with shade 210. I'm curious to know whether 110 would be a better shade match. However, I'm not 100% happy with the 110 match in the cream foundation. So honestly, I think that they're just a tad too dark for me. They're just not quite the right undertones and depth of color for me. So unfortunately, I don't have the best shade matches with SUQQU foundations. So, you know, aside from that though, I really, really love the product. I mean, you can see how smooth my skin looks with this powder foundation on. It has this glow, this like lit from within glow. And coming from a powder foundation, I find that really, really nice. A lot of powder foundations, you know, as you wear them, sometimes they look really nice when you first apply them, or an hour after you apply them, after like some of your natural oils have sunken in. This is different. You know, I haven't had any issues with oils like coming through or anything. It stays the same way it looks when I apply it all day. So I'm very impressed with the wear on this, and I'm impressed with the level of radiance that I can get from this without it looking like I have a powder on my skin. This actually looks more like a liquid foundation finish, and I think it's very impressive. Now, right now on my skin, I have the application that you saw third. So that would be the one with the dampened sponge. However, if you looked at the wear test, you could see that when I used it dry, again, you still have this type of finish, just slightly less coverage. So my recommendations for this powder, if you are looking for something with very, very light coverage, just the powder foundation itself is great. If you're looking to build up coverage from there, obviously you want to use something like a denser brush. I really like the Chantecaille Buff and Blur brush for this. You can also use something like the Sonia G Face One brush. You know, any sort of dense buffing brush would work really well. If you would like to have a little bit more coverage, I would recommend a dry sponge, and then following that, a dampened sponge, and you would get, you know, pretty good coverage with or without a primer. However, another use for this powder foundation, you could just use this to kind of top off a regular foundation, or if you are using like a complexion stick, for example, I really like to use the Merit complexion stick to kind of cover my redness. And then I can just kind of finish off my face by dusting this on top. If I want to go in really light, I can use a fluffier brush, and I just get like a little hint of that radiance and you know, kind of like a nice finishing touch. So I think this powder works really well for that as well. And just because it's not the best color match for me, at least right now, that's probably how I will use this more, because, you know, I don't want it to go to waste, and I think it's a gorgeous finish. So using it in a lighter coverage method will be better suited for me because of the shade. If, however, you would like to have all different possibilities for coverage, you'd like to build this up, I think with the primer, I think that's going to be the best option. So again, I didn't get the particular SUQQU primer, but I think that is going to be the way to go if you are looking for more coverage. So you want to go and build thin layers until you kind of get enough blurring, enough coverage that you want to cover whatever it is you're looking for. You can do this in spots if you like, build it up in spots. If you've got something in particular you'd like to cover, maybe like a hyperpigmentation spot or something like that, and then go over it with the foundation. Now, since I didn't have that one, I did use the Dior Forever Skin Veil Primer, and I think it's a fairly good substitute. So if you aren't sure whether you want to invest in it, play around and see how it works with ones that you already have. Now, I did test this powder foundation with additional primers, just to kind of see how it works. And it gives you, again, a beautiful finish, maybe slightly more coverage, or the appearance of more coverage, because other primers, you know, they still have a blurring effect, but using a more translucent primer doesn't provide as much coverage as something that has a little bit of tint to it. So just something to note there. But if you are interested, you know, you might want to try and play around with this on top of what you already have before investing. But if you're looking for, you know, the maximum results from this powder foundation, I would recommend trying out the SUQQU primer. When I first started using this powder foundation, I have to say that I was very underwhelmed. I was using it, wasn't really getting that much coverage. It just seemed kind of like a tinted face powder. But then I started playing around with it more, and I changed my application methods, and I ended up really, really loving this foundation. I think it has a gorgeous finish. I'm very impressed with the wear time on this, and I'm very impressed with how it looks on my skin. The only thing for me that's a negative is the actual shade match. I just don't think I have a good match there. And I think with them only having 9 shades in this collection, that's going to be true for quite a lot of people. So unfortunately, I think that's one of the biggest issues with this powder foundation. However, if you do have a shade match in it, I think it's a beautiful, beautiful product. And if you're somebody like me and there's not quite the right shade match, but there's something close, I think it's going to be a great, like, sort of like a finishing powder, you know, something to top your foundation with or top a complexion product with to provide just a little bit of light coverage and give you this gorgeous sheen. So overall, I think it's definitely a win. They do have some things to work on with this line though, in my opinion. Another thing that people may or may not like is the fact that, at least at the current time, it is sold as a refill with the case separately. I know that can bother some people. They want to buy everything all at once, but I do have to say that I appreciate the fact that you can buy them separately. If you already have a case that works, great. If you don't, it's up to you how you want to have it packaged, and you're not paying for excess packaging that you don't necessarily need. So I think that's definitely a plus. And obviously we know this is a product that sells refills, so there's always a bonus there. I'm very annoyed with companies who are selling refillable products without selling refills. So this is definitely a win in that direction for me. So I don't really have a lot of powder products to compare this to, but let me just swatch this. I have shade 210. You can see that it is a creamy product. And even though this is the cooler tone shade, the lightest cool tone shade, you can see it still has quite a bit of yellow tones in it. Let me compare this with the 110 in the cream foundation. So this is 110 in the cream, and I feel like it looks a little bit lighter personally. We're gonna let this sit for a minute so you can see what it looks like when it dries. While we're letting that dry, I'm gonna show you, this is the Shiseido Synchro Skin Self-Refreshing Powder Foundation. And this is shade 110, is it 110 or I-10? Yeah, 110 Alabaster. This is the shade I wear in this one. So you can see that it's definitely gonna be a lot lighter. This one's more neutral, whereas the 210 in SUQQU is still a bit more, it's more tan, more of a yellowish tan. All right, we're gonna just swatch a few more foundations. This is the Chanel Sublimage L'Essence de Teint in BR12. And you can see that this is drying, and as it has dried, it has gotten a bit deeper. And as a dry version, it looks like it's gonna be at least as deep, if not slightly darker than the powder foundation. You can see where the powder foundation is more sheared out, that it's a little bit lighter, but where it's more built up, they're pretty equal in depth. And next we have the Clé de Peau. This is the Radiant Fluid Matte Foundation in shade I-10. Next we have the Cojando Aqua in 002. And we're just gonna swatch one more, the Moisture in 012. All right, so here are these foundations. I'm gonna let it sit for a minute, and then we'll look at them after all oxidation has occurred. All right, so it's been a few minutes. Most of these are dry. There are still some wet areas here, but let's start from the beginning. So up here, we have the SUQQU Glow Powder Foundation in 210. This is the lightest cool tone shade. This is the SUQQU The Cream Foundation in 110, which is the lightest, what they consider neutral shade. So you can see after oxidation, after it has dried, it does get a lot darker. And then we have the Shiseido Synchro Skin Powder Foundation in shade 110 Alabaster, which is a better match for me. So you can see compared to these, the Shiseido is more ivory. It's more neutral overall. There's a little bit more pink in it than this, but not pink for like cool undertones. It's still a neutral undertone here. Then we have the Chanel Sublimage L'Essence de Teint in BR12. And this one here is the Clé de Peau Radiant Fluid Matte in I-10, Cojando Aqua in 002, and Cojando Moisture in 012. So in summation, I think that this is a great product overall. Now that I took the time to really kind of play around with this, I played around with different application methods, different primers and so forth. I really love this. I think it's a very versatile product. My only drawback with this product is the shade range. I think that SUQQU really needs to expand their shade range. They need lighter shades, they need deeper shades, and they need some different undertones. Everything tends to lean very warm. So hopefully they will start doing that, you know, as their market seems to be expanding. Hopefully they will kind of catch up and start providing some other shades in their base products. But I think the product itself is gorgeous. And if you happen to have a shade that works really well for you in SUQQU, then I think, you know, this is a really, really great product. So I'm going to continue to use it, even though I'm not happy with the color match, but I will use it more as a finishing powder because it's just that nice of a product. So overall, thank you so much for watching. I hope this was helpful and I was able to answer your questions about this powder foundation. If you have any other questions or comments, please leave them down below in the comment field or DM me on Instagram. I'm at Jong. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this, please give it a thumbs up. Consider subscribing if you haven't already, and I hope to see you very soon. Have a great day and stay safe and healthy.